But now let's look at the international arena for just the few closing moments. Over the past half century, trillions of dollars have been poured into what are sometimes called the less developed countries. $2 trillion have come from Western Europe and the United States to try to build up those countries. And what has happened? These programs have been almost a complete catastrophe. And as I said earlier today when I briefly discussed this, I would favor foreign aid programs only if I hated the human race. There'd be no other reason that I would support these. And why have they been failures? In large part because they've ignored everything we've looked at so far. Instead of encouraging the market and the economic means of wealth acquisition, they have encouraged the state and the political means. So instead of encouraging people to become wealthy by producing goods that other people desire, these aid programs have instead encouraged people that the way to get ahead is to lobby the government to get a portion of the aid money coming from the United States and Europe. By the 1980s, finally, the New York Times and the US government and other institutions finally acknowledged that decades of foreign aid programs were not working. Now, anybody could have seen that, any idiot could have seen this, but finally the New York Times finally says, you know what? These foreign aid programs haven't seemed to lift any countries out of poverty. It's amazing. I mean, who could have predicted this, they say? Well, the fact is a lot of free market economists did predict it, but nobody listened to them. Nobody listened to them because governments always know best. Don't worry, we can lift everybody out of poverty through some government program. Well, why were they such failures, and what did these programs do that backfired so badly on the people who were their architects? I mean, for heaven's sake, over the past decade alone, Egypt's percentage of people in extreme poverty has remained unchanged, even though they have gotten billions of dollars in aid. In fact, Egypt is the second largest beneficiary of United States aid. When Zambia became independent in 1964, their people had an annual income, on average, per capita, of $540 in 2001 dollars. By the year 2000, they were making only $300 a year. A dramatic collapse in spite of $6 billion in foreign aid. And the list goes on and on and on. Absolute disasters. Study after study has shown no correlation between foreign aid and increased life expectancy, or foreign aid and economic growth. To the contrary, we see largely a negative correlation. We see corruption promoted by these programs, and this is in effect where we get to the heart of things. Why is it that these foreign aid programs seem to lead to corruption? Well, think about what they do. They're not sending food to starving people. They're sending money from the U.S. government to other governments. But typically, the governments that are in need of foreign aid are in need of it because they're so crummy. They need foreign aid, and their economies are so bad because these governments are full of crooks. These governments are full of people who just loot the population 24 hours a day. So you give them more money? How is this going to have a happy outcome? In Africa, the situation is so bad where you've got people just lining their pockets with the foreign aid that Swahili now has a word, wabenzi, which means men of the Mercedes-Benz, to refer to the corrupt rulers who line their pockets with foreign aid dollars. It so happens that when Parade magazine last year listed what it considered to be the 20 worst dictators in the world, how many had the United States government given aid to? 19. How much progress have we seen? Absolutely zero. Even, again, the New York Times will never admit anything. They will never admit anything. And they say that 3 decades of foreign development assistance in the Third World has failed to lift the poorest of the poor in Africa and Asia much beyond where they have always been. It only fattened political elites. And again, why did it do that? For 2 reasons, well, for 3 reasons. Number one, it propped up corrupt governments. It delayed necessary reforms. Why reform your economy if you're going to get free money? You can do all kinds of stupid economic things. You're not going to feel the consequences because you get free money. If you take the free money away, then you might force them to reform. And then finally, even if you were to say, as is becoming fashionable these days, okay, let's just send the foreign aid to the nice countries that have nice people running. We won't send it to, the murderers, the cannibals, whatever. We'll send it to the nice people running these countries. It's still bad, because it still encourages 2 negative things. Number one, it encourages the political means of wealth acquisition, because people on the margin begin to see that the path to becoming wealthy is to go into politics and try and get a share of that foreign aid money, instead of spending their time on socially productive work, leading to making people better off. But secondly, the aid goes to a government, remember. So the aid increases the government sector. It increases the public sector. Well, as we've seen, it's the private sector and private investment that leads to increases in standard of living, and yet these aid programs lead to more so-called public investment. And so the result has been fairly predictable. In spite of the equivalent of 6 Marshall Plans, we still see devastation in Africa, but not uniformly. For example, in Botswana. Botswana is, in Africa, one of the most, if not the most, free market country in the whole continent. It's the place that most respects property rights, has one of the best climates for business. And what a big surprise. The average income per capita in Botswana is 5 to 10, 20, or even 30 times as high as in other countries in Africa. So this is not brain surgery. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to see that if you want to become wealthy, these are the institutional supports you need. Respect for private property and the rule of law, respect for contracts, low taxes, good business environment. This is what has made countries prosperous. Look at Hong Kong. I gave this as an example today. Hong Kong looks like, on paper, a place that has got to have foreign aid if it's going to prosper. It's got shortages of everything, shortages of water and coal, has no natural resources, and yet Hong Kong prospered only after foreign aid was discontinued to Hong Kong. And they realized, well, we can't just get by on foreign aid anymore, we're going to have to get our act together. And so what they do, they adopt the free market, low taxes, good business environment. They became so wealthy and so successful that Western European countries and the United States actually started to beg them, please don't send us your quality technological goods, because we can't compete with them. Okay? So, how did Hong Kong get successful? Through patronizing foreign aid programs that said to them, oh, well, you know, you're too backward ever to progress, so you better get billions of dollars of aid. No, they progressed by adopting the free market, and the result was an explosion in wealth that has made them one of the most envied places in the world. It's a wonderful place to live. The same is true of West Germany after World War II, South Korea today, Taiwan, Japan. Japan, again, has got almost no resources. It's mostly mountainous. It's got no natural benefits, and yet prospers fantastically. Now, again, there's an obvious point here, that there is something to be cheered about the market system, and yet there is nothing that is more reviled, despised, caricatured, and ridiculed than the free market economy. I may also note, by the way, that a lot of these development programs where foreign aid is sent overseas fail to bother to look at what kind of business environment is in these countries. Maybe we should try to fix that. Because, for example, in Peru, maybe you can figure out one of the reasons Peru is not doing well. Hernando de Soto wrote a book called The Other Path. And he wanted to know why his country was doing so badly. Well, one of the things he found was that it took the equivalent of 289 workdays, 81 meters of forms, and 8 overt bribes in order to legally establish a small clothing factory. Well, you're never going to be rich if you have a government that's that stupid. You're never going to be rich. I mean, that government deserves that. The people, however, do not. Now, finally, I mean, I've also got also tending to mention about the fact that there are plenty of countries where violence has broken out because different racial groups or whatever, different interest groups in the country are all vying for a share of the grant money, and so it becomes violent and massacres are carried out. It's just a horror show overall. And yet, again, all of the world's economically